Hello and welcome along to another month, another webinar here at Opus Partners with Property Live. It's so good to see you guys again. Now, I always like to kick it off with a little bit of a sound check. My colleague Andrew here, and boss, has just been over in Fiji on a trip, and as a sound check, I want you to tell me on a scale of 1 to 10, how tan is Andrew looking right now? Prize for the funniest response.
Oh, -1.
I saw a -1.
That's pretty fair.
A pasty, a -1, a 3 out of 3. We'll take that. Look, he's pretty. Yeah, what are you doing? That is pasty. I think you just threw out the camera's white balance showing off your little ankle there, mate. It's so good to see that so many of you guys are here back again today. For anybody who doesn't know me, my name's Ed. I'm an economist here at Opus Partners. This is Andrew, and we are going to jump straight into it because tonight we're launching a lot of very cool things. And if you've never been along to a Property Live, this is one of the ones to come along to. So sometimes when I think about property investors, you might see somebody like Liz Harris, who lives in Christchurch. She is Australasia's largest female property investor, owns over 122 properties, according to the last most public article. You might know people like Pauline Bicell. She hosted us in Palmerston North for the New Zealand Property Investors Federation Conference. She's got 13 properties, and Andrew, my colleague here, he's got 40 properties. He's based in Christchurch. And you see these people, and you know, they've probably done quite well out of property. But one of the big questions when you're trying to invest in property is, but how well am I going to do out of property? How much money can I make out of property, especially when I'm out there and looking at investment properties today? And another big question that people often ask is, well, what sort of property should I buy? What is going to make me more money? Is it this one over here or this different property that I'm looking at? And on top of that, another big question you guys might be having as you're sitting there on your Tuesday night thinking about investing in property is, well, where should I invest in property? Which area is going to make me the most money? And so these are all of the questions we're going to answer today. Whether how much money you can make from property, the best areas to invest, and on top of that, which property is going to make me more money. Now, some of you guys have been here before, and you will have seen my return on investment spreadsheet. This is what you can see right in front of you. And we gave that away. We started giving it away 3.5 years ago. It has been downloaded over 18,000 times. So many property investors have downloaded this and have used this to run their numbers. It is amazing.
The Holy Grail, you called it.
I used to call it the Holy Grail. We're burning it tonight. We are burning it tonight, and instead, after this webinar, there's 2 things you're going to walk away with, which are even better. First, I'm going to give you data for every area in New Zealand, over 1,000 suburbs. Nobody has ever given away data like this in New Zealand. You're going to get it for free tonight. And on top of that, we are going to give you our new app, which allows you to analyze any property in New Zealand. And when I came to Andrew and said, I want to spend what will end up being well over $100,000 building a new app so that any New Zealander could analyze any property, he said to me, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to charge people $20 a month for it, $19.95? I said, no, we're not going to do that. He said, okay, can we charge $9.95 a month? I said, no. He said, okay, can we charge $4.95? I said, no, we're going to give it away for free. And on top of that, we're going to make it free forever. So whether you're watching this live with us today, you're going to get it for free. Whether you're listening to this podcast in 10 years' time, hopefully our podcast will still be around, it's going to be free forever. We're going to give it away for the community. And the really exciting thing about this is there are so many people here tonight. Over 3,600 people are registered. And so some of you will be new. You might never have come to a Property Live before. And so you might be wondering, who are you guys? And that's where I'm going to hand it over to Andrew to talk about who we are if you have never met us before.
So if you've never heard of us before, and I said there's a few new people here, so Ed and I host New Zealand's #1 business podcast, and we do that daily, and we've been doing that for just over 5 years. We just had our 5-year anniversary. We've had over 9.1 million downloads, which we're pretty excited about. Mostly excited because we've created quite an awesome community of people that tune into these webinars, tune into the podcast, listen to the articles, watch our videos, because we put out a whole lot of content so that you can make informed investment decisions. Whether or not you work with us, kind of doesn't matter. We're just happy to put out that information. So other than the podcast, we've done over 50 webinars now. We started those in lockdown. COVID lockdown. We did them every week in COVID lockdown, and now we do them once a month. We own New Zealand Property Investor magazine, and our book, Wealth Plan, is currently in bookstores. It's been a bestseller for a couple of years now, and also on audible.com. Ed, he's our economist here at Opus Partners. He's a property investor, and I'm a property investor as well, and the managing director of Opus Partners.
Now, Andrew, we always get some classic questions at all of these webinars about whether it's recorded. So what is everybody going to get?
So after the webinar, you are going to get the recording for free. Stay along till the end, because the Q&A, that's something where you can answer we can answer as many of your questions as we've got time for, and you'll get all that tomorrow as well. In terms of the Q&A, anyone that's been here before has heard me harp on about this.
Something Andrew's very passionate about.
Only because people put their question in the chat, which is awesome, but we miss them at the end. So because we answer all of the questions at the end, there's two things I need you to do. Put your chat in the chat and put your questions in the Q and answer. Anyone that comes in a little bit later, if someone puts a question in there, we tend to miss them. So make sure that they go in the Q&A so we can answer them at the end. And if you're in the chat at the moment and you haven't switched your setting to everyone, make sure you do, because if it's just a host and panelists, only Ed and I are going to see it, and David, producer Dave.
And Andrew and I are going to be chatting back and forth throughout the webinar. The cool thing is there are hundreds of property investors here ready to answer your questions. And on top of that, it's not just the community tonight, there's a couple of extras.
So we've got Kathy Faulkner, one of our senior property advisors in Auckland, and young Kathy, Neffy, also there. So both from our Auckland office. There we go. So there's Kathy there. She's going to be they're going to be answering questions as we go as well. And if anyone's got a question where maybe we've got a link or we've done a podcast on it, they're going to pop that in the chat group as well. They're here to help out as well tonight.
Cool. So Andrew, what are we going to go through?
Okay, tonight we're going to start with how much money you can actually make in property investment and how you make it. Then we're going to talk about the areas that make the most money, because if you're making an investment decision, that's what you care about, but then also the types of properties that are going to make the most money.
Awesome. So let's dive into it, and we're going to start with the 4 ways that you can make money in property. So let's dive in, Andrew. Kick us off with capital growth.
Okay, let's start with capital growth. So that's where you buy a property, and over time, the purchase price, obviously that stays the same, or your mortgage might stay the same. Your home is going to go up in value over time. That's the capital growth. So the difference between what you paid for it and what it's worth in the future.
Yep, so pretty simple. I think here in New Zealand, we're all pretty comfortable with the idea that property prices have tended to go up in value, and you can make quite a substantial amount of money. The second of the 4 ways to make money in real estate, we call it cash flow. And what happens when you purchase an investment property is you'll get some rental income and you'll have some expenses. And what we see is that your rental income tends to increase over time at a faster rate than your expenses. The main reason behind that is when you buy a property, you take out a mortgage, and usually your mortgage stays the same or goes down while your rental income tends to grow. So at the start, when you first purchase an investment property, especially at today's interest rates, your expenses, including your mortgage, might be slightly higher than your rental income. That's okay. Over time, it's likely to change, and your income, your rental income will be higher than your expenses, and you'll start to make some cash flow there. Okay, then we've got debt repayments.
Now, as Ed mentioned before, often when you buy a property in today's interest rate environment and with 100% borrowing, which is a lot of people, that's how they invest, then at the start, your property is usually cash flow negative. So there might not be a lot of surplus cash that you're going to pay down debt. However, as time goes on, rent goes up, interest rates are likely to come down over the next few years, it's likely that that property will become positively geared. And that money, often people might like to use that to pay down debt. So let's look at an example where your purchase price, obviously that just carries on, that never changes, but your mortgage goes down. So now you've got some extra equity in that property because you've been diligently paying principal off the mortgage.
Okay, so we've got our first 3 ways: capital growth, cash flow, and debt repayments. Our 4th way to make money in property is what's called instant equity. And there are 2 ways to do this. Firstly, let's say you purchase a property and you're able to pay a price that is below the property's value. That creates some instant equity there because you've paid a lower price than what the asset is worth. Now, Andrew, there's a bit of an argument to be had about whether you can really do that. Be the old grumpy man and give us maybe a more pessimistic view.
So often I'll say, look, if you get a valuation on a property and it says it's worth 600,000, but you're paying 575,000, well, it's probably only worth 575, because if it was actually worth 600,000, well, someone would have paid that, right? But there is an argument in certain instances. If you're building a property, often there might be some equity uplift because something that exists actually is worth more than something off paper. Or if maybe you're buying off someone that you know and they're giving you a genuine discount because they like you. Or maybe you're buying maybe something unusual like a deceased estate and there's no one else bidding or something like that.
Yeah, cool. So that's one type of instant equity. The other type is one that, again, here in New Zealand, we're very comfortable with. You might purchase a property, you might spend some money on a renovation, and then you find that the value of the property is higher than the combined price you've paid and the reno. That's what we also call instant equity. So two different types there where you can make money in property. And so these are the 4 key ways that you really need to know about when we think about making money in real estate. And we've got to think about how much we can make through each of them, whether it's capital growth, cash flow, paying down debt, or instant equity. And before we go on and actually dig into the numbers of how much money you could potentially make, one of the coolest things in these webinars is doing a little poll. Now, don't put your answer in the chat. We're going to put a popover on your screen now. And I want to know, well, what do you think makes the most money in property over 15 years? Is it capital growth? Is it cash flow? Is it paying off the mortgage or instant equity? Producer Dave has just put that across your screen. So dive in now. Let us know what you think. There are over 1,000 people live on the webinar with us right now, an amazing amount. And over 500 people have already answered that question.
Interesting answers.
So we are going to close that poll off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Producer Dave, close it off for us and share those results. And what we see is that over 80% of you guys are saying capital growth, 8% of you are saying cash flow, 5% saying paying off the mortgage, and a couple of you guys are saying instant equity. Now, the truth of the matter is it really depends on which strategy you are going for. If you're a property flipper, instant equity is definitely the main way, if not the only way you're going to make money. If you're investing in a smaller town where property prices might not go up as often or as smoothly, then cash flow could definitely be the way that you tend to make a bit more money. But one thing I wanted to share with you is I recently wrote this article for One Roof where I specifically went through the numbers and talked about, well, how much money can you make out of an investment property? And I want to share that with you now because this is one of the ones that I was actually particularly proud of. And what I did in this article is I go through a standard property in New Plymouth and I ran all of the numbers. And I ran the numbers of this property in New Plymouth and said, well, based on all of the interest rate changes, based on all of the house price movements in New Plymouth, based on all of the rental increases and decreases in New Plymouth and all of the tax rules which have changed 2 or 3 times over the last 10 years, how much money would this investor, how much money would they have made by owning that property over 10 years? And the first thing I want to show you is that it's actually very variable. So this dotted line here is the average. On average, they made 36.8K per year. But there was only 1 year that was almost exactly 36.8K. There were a lot of years where it was higher than that, and there were some years where, yeah, they lost money as well. And what I've modeled out here is both the cash flow return and the house price increase.
So you put the increase minus the cash flow or the loss in one instance?
Yeah, the loss in house prices. And as we see here, there are times where in the year 2021, they would have made 6.1K in cash flow and made 170K in house price increases. Wow. In the year 2020, they made almost 100K. 96 of that came from the house going up in value, and 4K of it came from cash flow. But right at the start, the cash flow was negative. It would have been negative by about 3K per year, and that was back when the government would give you a tax credit if you had
old days.
if you had a negatively geared property. And so the first point, as I said, is that the returns are variable. The second point is this graph down here that I want to show you. Oh,
look at that picture of you.
I hate that picture of me, but they won't change it. I look very squinty in that one. The sun was in my eyes. The second thing I want to show you is that the return on cash flow compared to the capital growth, the increase in value of the property, is really, really stark. So in the years where property went up in value, you made way more than cash flow. But don't forget this year in 2022, where this investor would have lost almost $50,000 from the property going down in value, and that year, yes, cash flow made them more money. They made about 4.5K there. So a couple of key lessons. First of all, yes, the returns are variable. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two, we do tend to see that capital growth tends to make more money than cash flow, especially when you buy with a very, very large mortgage. But over the long term, this investor ended up making $405,000 over a 10-year period. That is both from the cash flow and also from the house going up in value. I've assumed no debt repayments here and also no instant equity. And so the first kind of answer to that question of how much can I make through property? Well, this investor, as an example, would have made just over $400,000 over a 10-year period. And after those 10 years, they're probably making, a bit of money through cash flow. And this year, it would have been not so much because interest rates are so high. But all of that is actually quite difficult to go ahead and figure out. And one of the reasons is you've got to go model out, well, what were the actual interest rates? What were the actual increases in rents? What were the actual changes in house prices? And what you'll see is it's not necessarily as smooth as what you might forecast, which we'll get into a little later on. But some of you might be sitting there thinking, okay, that was the last 10 years. What about the next 10 years? Because properties are more expensive now, so maybe the returns will be a little bit different. And we'll give you an exact answer a little bit later on in the show because we've got our new app to answer this. But I want to give you a sense now. So Andrew, if somebody was purchasing a $700K property today, and let's say it rents out for $650, over the next, say, 15 years, what might happen to capital growth?
So where's the property, first of all?
Well, let's assume that it's based in Dunedin.
Okay, Dunedin. So normally, if we were to forecast what the growth might look like on that, we'd probably use something like a 5% capital growth rate if it's just a house. So it's a growth asset going up at kind of a conservative enough growth rate. And I saw actually someone ask the question, house prices have been increasing higher than wages, so how is that sustainable? We actually had a really interesting guy on the podcast today, so that'll come out in the next week. He's the Kiwi Bank's economist.
Chief economist.
Chief economist. And we were talking about this, and I guess the really short answer is, we still don't have enough houses. Yep, it might feel like sometimes when a property takes a little bit longer to rent, maybe there's an oversupply. If we see a bunch of townhouses being built, is that a sign of an oversupply? But we actually don't have enough houses in New Zealand. So I still think there'll be, or the Reserve Bank actually, they kind of use the model of around 5%, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. 5% is their long-term increase, and we can talk more about it in the Q&A. So let's say 5% over 15 years, property might double in value. That'd be about 700K of capital gains. When it comes to talking about cash flow, and we'll dive into this, I'd expect that this property might make around 80K in cash flow over a 15-year period. They might lose a little bit of money in the short term in terms of cash flow, but over a 15-year period, 80K is pretty standard. I'm going to assume that this investor can make that cash flow though and not paying down any debt. And let's say that they negotiated a really good deal or maybe did a little reno and they made 50K out of instant equity. And I just want to say, over the next 15 years, I don't think it would be unreasonable to think that, hey, you might be able to make 830K out of an investment property if you're getting a bit of cash flow, if you're making those capital gains, if you've got a little bit of instant equity. I don't think that is out of the question, though I want to give you a more specific number a little later on. And as we saw in the poll and also under these numbers, capital growth will probably drive the majority of your gains. And so if we think about those 4 ways to make money, capital gains, cash flow, debt repayments, instant equity, what you guys will often find is that different property investment companies specialize in a different way to make money in property. So let's say you're one of those people who said, I want to make money out of instant equity. That's how I make the most money. Asset Lab, which is a company based in Auckland, they coach property flippers. And I think they're probably one of the best companies that help people make money through instant equity. That's not something Andrew and I specialize in, but Asset Lab are great. If you instead want to make money out of debt repayments, and that is a valid strategy, a company like New Zealand Home Loans or Enable Me are really good companies that help you focus on paying down debt. If it comes to cash flow, a company like Wolf Property Consulting or Wolf Property Coaching, they're really good at focusing on how you renovate properties to create that cash flow. But when Andrew started Opus Partners many years ago, he kind of looked out at the market and said, but who's focusing on the capital gains side? After all, capital gains is how you make the most money through property. And so this is where we think we come in, looking at a lot of data, trying to figure out, well, where do you find those areas that increase in value fastest? And that's why we're now going to dive into part 2. We've talked about how much money you can make and where those returns come from and given you some basic examples. We're going to dive deeper into that in part 3, where we talk about the properties that make the most money. But Andrew, talk to us about how we find areas, or how an investor can find an area that makes more money.
Yeah, this is my favourite of our models. So Ed developed this, and when I say developed, I mean stole this off Tony Alexander a number of years ago and just critiqued it, right?
We've changed, we've adapted it quite a bit.
We've adapted it. This is our overvalued and undervalued model. And why this is important is because if you look at data from, often developers put this up. They'll put up the New Zealand's median house price increase for the year. Who cares? You're not buying the median house price in New Zealand. There's no such thing. You're buying a property in Christchurch, or you're buying a property in Wellington, or wherever you're buying. You want to know whether or not that market is at the opportune time to get the maximum amount of growth in the shortest period of time. So we've developed a model which looks at the long-term average of where that region's prices are in line with where it would be based on a long-term average against New Zealand's median house price. So basically that's a long-winded way of saying, is it expensive compared to where we'd expect it to be, or is it cheap compared to where it would be? And different regions will go into the overvalued or the undervalued at different times. And what we're looking for is an area which is undervalued, where it's cheaper than we expect it to be, so that you can get some good growth in a short period of time.
And I want to give you an example of Wellington, because if you went back to 2015 and we're looking at Wellington house prices, what might you have thought, Andrew?
So right then you might have said, you know what? I've had a friend that's owned a property in Wellington, and for the last 8 years, there's been no growth, absolutely no growth. And at that time, it was overvalued based on our model. Our model would not have told you to buy in Wellington back in 2008 because it was overvalued. And then you might think, you know what, I'll just go somewhere else. You might have sold up your rental property that you've owned for the last 8 years, and then lo and behold, the person that buys it for the next few years gets a property in an undervalued region.
And so what's quite interesting there is that sometimes a flat market might not indicate that a property isn't going to go up in value in the future. It might indicate that it does. And in fact, if you'd purchased in 2015, Andrew, how much money would you have made?
You would have had 150% increase from that bottom of that flat part of the market right through to the peak of the market. So if you timed it perfectly, you would have got a massive increase in quite a short period of time.
And just bear in mind that since then, property values have gone down because we've moved from an overvalued market to an undervalued market. But you see here, Wellington property prices went from being 20% undervalued to being 10% overvalued. So we saw a change in the property cycle. And what that really means is that Wellington house prices were accelerating at a faster pace than the rest of the country. So if you'd purchased at that time, you would have outperformed other areas of the market.
And just to give you another example, and you can find all of this data on our website for free under Data Hub or under X Market Update. So for example, if you go to the Auckland Market Update, which I was using with an investor just today, we looked at the bottom of, we looked at where Auckland is in its property cycle right now, and it's as low as it has ever been before. Last time it was about this low was back in 2009, mid 2009. And in mid-2009, you would have paid for the average property in Auckland $440,000. And if you fast forward the next 10 years, properties grew at 93%. That's an average of 9.3% a year. That's huge. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to guarantee that you're going to get that over the next 10 years, but it's certainly a good indicator that it might be a good time to consider somewhere like Auckland.
And I think a really important question that some of you will be thinking is, but Ed and Andrew, does this actually work? Like, that is such an important question. Does it really work? And so one of Andrew's private property newsletters, by the way, he writes a newsletter every Thursday that gets sent out to the entire Opus database. Some of you will be on that now. We actually talked about, does this actually work and can you make more money if you do this? And I want to share that article with you now and just go through some of the main points because it's very, very important, this stuff. And so what I did is I looked back and I said, okay, sometimes house prices will be overvalued, sometimes they'll be undervalued. At the moment, we see Auckland as being undervalued. And so I said, well, let's zoom back. Let's go to 23 years ago. Let's say you started investing in the year 2000. What areas were the most undervalued if you ran that model at that time? And at that time, you would have had the choice between Otorohanga and Queenstown. And given that Otorohanga would be 32% undervalued and Queenstown's 31%, I probably would have chosen to go for Queenstown at that point. And then you say, okay, well, over the next 4 years, let's say you bought the average property in Queenstown, how did Queenstown property prices increase compared to the rest of New Zealand? So let's say you bought a 200k property in Queenstown or the average 200k property in New Zealand. Well, what we see is that Queenstown property prices started to take off over the next 4 years. There were some ups and downs, but over the next 4 years of purchasing on that date, you would have made $214,000, almost $215,000. Now, if you'd purchased the average property in New Zealand, you would have made 120k and you would have felt pretty good about that. But you would have made an extra $95,000 had you purchased in Queenstown. So choosing an undervalued area would have made you 94 grand more. Pretty good. Okay, now you're feeling pretty good about yourself and you decide that you're going to rerun the numbers. You're going to look at where is undervalued and where's overvalued. Well, this is very important. Notice this. Queenstown, it's increased by a lot. It's increased faster than the rest of the country. And so you might be thinking, oh, Queenstown's working for me. Let me buy another property in Queenstown. Not so fast. You've already had that growth. It's now overvalued. We've got to look somewhere else. So you might have looked down and said, okay, we could either look to invest in Rangatiki district, you could look at South Taranaki district and say, okay, where am I going to invest? Now, in these numbers, we're going to say South Taranaki because that's where I grew up. I'm from Hawera. And so let's say we buy a property there. Well, the average property in South Taranaki at that point was worth about 100k. So let's say you could either invest in a 100k property in South Taranaki or the average 100k property in New Zealand. Well, over the next 4 years, what would have happened? Well, your property in South Taranaki would have gone up by almost $83,000. The average property in New Zealand would have gone up by about $24,000. And so the undervalued area, South Taranaki, in that case, would have outperformed by $59,000. You made an extra $59,000 because you made an informed investment decision. Okay. Here we get to 2012, we're going to say. I'm going to skip ahead. This one is really important because if you reread the numbers, you would see that the most undervalued areas in New Zealand were Kawerau district, which is in the Bay of Plenty, or Opotiki. Both would be 23% undervalued. But if you ran these numbers, some of you would say, well, I don't like any of those areas. I don't want to invest in Kawerau or Opotiki, which are very smaller areas, or I don't fancy investing in Gisborne because it's a smaller area. Let me invest in Napier City. And this is where it gets interesting. Over the next 4 years, actually the undervalued area, Napier, would have underperformed again. Now, you still would have made 108k, but relative to the average property in New Zealand, you actually would have made slightly less money. Now, why is that? You just told me, Ed, it was an undervalued area. And the reason is because Napier was going down in its property cycle. Over the long term, you would have done pretty well, but at that specific point, it didn't outperform. And so it's also important to recognize that if you decide to ignore the model and say, oh, I'm going to make a different decision, maybe you won't get the same result. But if you add it all up and you kept investing in undervalued areas, this article, we go through the numbers, you would have made an extra $1 million investing in property. You would have made $3.1 million compared to $2.1 million in capital growth by choosing the undervalued area. And if you think about what that potentially means for your retirement or just for your own financial security or your ability to help out your family, obviously if you've got more money, about 50% more money, it's much, much easier to feel financially secure and help out your family and do all of those fun things that you want to do through property. I see you want to jump in.
Well, I'm just thinking, I'm yet to meet an investor who doesn't say that, yes, they want another $1 million.
Yeah, and of course, this doesn't guarantee that you're going to get it if you follow this model, but it's a way of investing in property and thinking about property that I don't think many people have done in New Zealand. Some of you guys will have been along to our webinars and seen this for the last couple of years and maybe even invested this way. Maybe you invested in Christchurch in the year 2020, where Christchurch has way outperformed the rest of New Zealand and maybe seen the benefits of that. And for some of you, this might be new tonight. But if we're thinking about that kind of what should I look for in when I'm choosing an area to invest, the first one is property cycle. Where is it in its property cycle? Is that region in an opportune part of its property cycle, and is there an opportunity to invest? The other one is looking for areas that have increased in value faster, where they've had higher capital growth rates. Another one is areas with a good yield as well, where are rental returns pretty good. And on top of that, affordable house prices. These are probably the four main things investors need to think about when they're choosing a place to invest. But there is a very, very important question that you're probably going to ask me, Ed. Ed, how am I supposed to figure this all out? That's back when I could fit that jacket, Andrew, and I was a bit skinnier. Alas, I don't look like that anymore. That's a good photo. And what I'm going to give away to you guys today is what we're calling Area Analyser. So this is a new tool that we're going to take you through. It's free. You get it right now. It just went live today. And you can get free property data for any region in New Zealand, for example, Canterbury, any council area in New Zealand, for example, Christchurch City, and any suburb in New Zealand, for example, Addington, which is a suburb within Christchurch. And the cool thing is, we're going to show you this right now, and I'll start pulling it up for you, Andrew. And
Richard Chu is chomping at the bit. Is it chomping or champing?
I think it's champing.
Champing.
What was that? What was that thing we watched? Billions. Billions told me it was champing, not chomping.
Did they have that debate?
Yeah, they had the debate on there.
He's champing at the bit.
He's champing at the bit.
So here you go, Richard. This is your teaser.
So you can come into Area Analyser, and let's hope it works, because it's always when you go to show somebody your shiny new toy that it doesn't work. But let's say we want to look at that suburb, Addington in Christchurch. So we type that in, and hopefully a little thing will come up that says it. Let's give that a refresh, reconnect to the database. You're going to be able to type in Addington there, and what's going to come up is we're going to be able to go in. Might be slow because I'm down in the basement, Andrew. And we come in and we are able to see data for Addington, and you should go check this out. And the most important thing that we've added in here is not just the average house value, not just the average rent, not just the estimated yield, but we've got a whole heap of insights here about how are Addington property prices changing. What about the rental data? What does a 2-bedroom property rent for? What about a 3-bedroom property? How many properties have rented in the last 12 months? What about last month? 40 properties for Addington. And what's the median days it takes to actually rent a property there? And we've also got data about how many bedrooms renters actually rent in that suburb. So 44% of people who rent properties in Addington choose to rent a 2-bedroom property, and we also see the number of cars. But when it comes to that question, which was how do I figure out which area to invest in, we've started to summarize all of that data for you here. This is the first time I've seen any company do this in New Zealand. So we can see, where is Addington within its property cycle? We think it's pretty good. Where is the long-term growth? And this is compared to other suburbs within Christchurch. It's on the higher end. What about the yield? It's pretty good in Addington compared to other suburbs in Christchurch, and the house prices are on the lower side. So I've always been a bit of a fan of Addington. The data's looking pretty good. But you might start to come in here and choose a different suburb as well. And if you were to do that, you might type in a suburb like Bishopdale, and if you did that, you would see that it comes up with some other data. Now, of course, you can scroll through and see it, but we can see that actually the long-term growth in Bishopdale is slightly lower. The estimated yield is roughly the same, and the house price is slightly higher. And so you can start to compare different areas and say, well, which one do you want to actually invest in? And based on this data, this is a have you been paying attention test. Producer David is going to chuck a poll across your screen to say, well, which area would you invest in? Would you invest in Addington, or would you invest in Bishopdale based on that data that you've seen? Producer David's just putting that across your screen right now.
And while David's doing that, and while you're answering this, someone asked the question: how often is this data going to be updated? And we've got we've got about 1,200 people on the webinar right now. It's pretty cool to have so many people here live tonight. Ed, how often are you going to update this data, my friend?
Okay, so property cycle data updates automatically every month. Rental data updates every month. Average house price updates every 3 months because that's the cycle we get it from CoreLogic. And is there any other data in there? The stuff around renters and what they rent, that updates every 5 years based on census data, though we will have an updated version based on the new census probably within the next 6 months. And I'm going to end that poll here and share that with everybody now, so we can see that 90% of you are saying, hey, I'd probably decide to invest in Addington, 10% saying, you know what, I actually still think that we're going to invest in Bishopdale. And I see John Haas got a question, Andrew. Just read that one.
John Haas said, I expect data updated faster from an XL esports champion. What is he talking about, Ed?
So I think what he's saying there is, oh, wouldn't it be nice if the data updated more frequently? I wish it did, but that's every month is how fast CoreLogic, QV, and the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand update their data. So that's what I'm able to get at the moment.
Just one thing that we're trying to do is just make this so easy for an investor or either an existing investor or would-be investor to actually make informed decisions. Now, you do have to apply some common sense to some of these things as well, because data can tell one story, but there might be reasons for certain things. So if you're looking at this and saying, okay, well, Bishopdale, it's had slower long-term growth or lower long-term growth. Okay, but if you want to invest in a house there because you're going to do a flip and it wants to be a family home, well, that could still be the better option for you. So don't think that the data tells you the whole story. You do have to use some anecdotal stuff, but we've taken all of the information and put it together in a way that should be easily digestible to make an informed investment decision.
And one thing I'd just say is I saw somebody say, hey, maybe it's not quite working for me. I tried to put a suburb in. What I would say is this is first version, not forever version. So sometimes when we launch things, there's always little technical bugs. So the really cool thing is I'm here listening for your feedback mainly. So we'll have a look through at any of the stuff you guys are saying in the chat. If it's not quite working for somebody, the most important thing that we always think here at Opus is let's get it out so you guys can start testing it and using it. Then we're going to make it perfect as well, because this data just hasn't been available in the past.
And right now, probably a lot more people have jumped on it all at once. So there's a high probability that if it's not loading for you at the moment, it'll probably work later on.
Let's do one more example of this, Andrew. Let's talk about Mount Eden, which is a suburb in Auckland, and we'll specifically take a look at some of the data. So property cycle, we're saying good. Long-term growth, actually pretty good compared to other parts of Auckland. The estimated yield is looking particularly bad, and the house price is kind of so-so. Now, just before we comment on that, let's compare that to another Auckland suburb like Auckland Central, which is right in the middle of the city. And we can see in terms of the property cycle, it's the same because we calculate that at a council area level. So it's pretty good. The long-term growth in Auckland Central has actually been very, very bad, but the yield is high and the average house price is high. So some of this actually speaks more to the properties that are within the suburb as opposed to saying something about the area itself. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so in Auckland CBD, you've got a lot of apartments, so you might be paying a high price, you might be getting a pretty good yield because you're maybe not buying the land, it could be leasehold land. So again, going back to that, not telling the full story, you could look at that and say, okay, well, Auckland CBD is a terrible investment. Well, not necessarily. If you're wanting a high yielding asset and you're not caring so much about long-term growth because you're retired, you just want to get a good income, it could be the right fit. Compare that though to Mount Eden. So you might look at that and go, well, an estimated yield of 2%, I can't buy a property there. Well, interestingly enough, I've just had an investor buy a property there with a 4.5% yield. So again, this doesn't tell the whole picture, but it's there to give you a tool to use to compare, to use this to compare to properties you might be considering.
And on top of that, we see that, you know, the average house value in Mount Eden is almost $1.7 million. But you could buy an investment property for far less than that. And in fact, it's amazing that 48% almost of the people who live in Mount Eden actually rent, which some people might find quite surprising. Now, we were going to do a poll just because I want to get you into Opus Plus in a second. We're going to skip past that, but I do want to mention that you can also get data for individual territorial authorities. So here is an example of Dunedin and the information you could get there about that as well. Now, the next thing, the last thing I want to talk about just before we get into Opus Plus as well, is that when you decide to, you know, how am I going to go find the right areas to invest, you absolutely can use Area Analyser at home by yourself, but you might also decide to check out that little QR code in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and book a free meeting with our team at Opus Partners and decide to find properties and choose properties with the guys who built this tool as well. Okay, we've talked about how much money you can make, we've talked about the areas that make more money, and we've given you a tool, but that is actually not the best tool we're giving away today. Now we're going to talk about properties that make more money. And one of the big questions people have asked me for a while is, how do I tell which properties are actually going to make me more money? As I said before, we have released this spreadsheet 3.5 years ago, the return on investment calculator, and it's been downloaded over 18,000 times. But I've listened to your feedback, and again, that's what tonight's about, and some of you have told me different things. One person, this was actually one of our staff members, Andrew, Holly said to me, Ed, I opened your spreadsheet and then I closed it because I couldn't figure it out. I've had other investors call me up and say the same thing. Ed, I just can't figure out what it means. And some people actually don't have Microsoft Excel because sometimes you've got to pay for that and not everybody has that on their computer. And that's why we're getting rid of that spreadsheet today and we're introducing Opus Plus, which is a free tool where you can figure out your cash flow. Now, this is live right now and I want to give you a little bit of a demo on it. And I know this is something that Andrew has been hitting me up about for a little bit. Now, when you actually log into Opus Plus, and you can go and create your free account, I'll tell you how to do it at the end of the webinar so you guys stay focused. When you first log in, you're going to see a couple of things. First, you're going to see an estimate of how your wealth might grow over time, and you're also going to see your mortgages potentially being paid down. And to prepare for this webinar, and Andrew, you need to focus on this. Why are you in there?
I'm just checking out something.
We have 3 prospective properties that we're actually going to take you through today. So we've got 2 properties that are actually new builds and under construction, and then we've got an older property as well. And one of the really cool things is you're able to turn on and off these properties. So you can say, well, what would my portfolio look like if I only had this one? And what would my portfolio look like if I added this one and this one in as well? This is something that Andrew's been asking me about for a while. On top of this, you can jump in, look at the wealth, look at the cash flow of these properties, and also add them in, change all of the assumptions, and jump in. And I'll just take you through this property because this is one that Andrew sent me in preparation for this webinar. And why did you choose this one to talk through today, Andrew?
Johnsonville's best buy. I wanted to do something in Wellington, and I think somewhere on the headline it was talking, or in the blurb, it was talking about it being an investor's dream, and actually it seemed like a pretty good deal. Buyer's inquiry over 700k. I thought, well, if you bought it for 700k, it's a 3-bed, you might get $750 a week rent. Seemed like an okay investment.
Yeah, okay, and we also looked down at the rent as well, decided that we'll chuck it in and have a little look-see. Now, when you do this, I'm going to hit the edit button. You can pop in the address, you can chuck in whether it's a townhouse or, you know, when it was built and the current value. You can chuck in your mortgage as well. We're going to say that this investor buys that for $700K and takes out a $700,000 interest-only mortgage at 6.3%. We're going to say it rents for $750 a week, that they don't have a tenant, so they might have some vacancy in the property once they buy it, just while they find a tenant, and that it might be empty for 2 weeks of the year. And I've chucked in a whole heap of costs. So the rates on this property, I checked it online, is just over $5,000. The insurance in Wellington might be quite expensive and the maintenance might be around $2,000 per year. Now, if I click through and add that property, we can start to look at the cash flow. And it looks like at today's high interest rates that it might require a $500 a week top up to purchase that existing property, but that will go down over time, start to become cash flow positive. And I've also added in 2 new builds as well. Now, one of the best things that you can do in here, and this comes to that question of how do I figure out what makes me more money, is you can add up to 3 properties in here, save them in, and start to compare them in terms of what's going to increase in value the most, what's going to give me the best return on my investment. And also switch out the graphs down here. Now, Andrew, if you were looking at this, what's the first thing you notice when you're thinking about these 3 properties?
Well, I certainly noticed that there's a way higher return on investment on the Auckland property. That would be something that would stand out to me. So if I was purely looking to make the most amount of money, I go for the highest return on investment. Now, there's lots of times where you might not do that. And so again, you want to make sure that you use these tools correctly. So I'll give you a good example. If you are retired or entering retirement and you want to buy some high yielding properties and you want to use a whole lot of cash, that's going to bring your return on investment down because you're not using bank funding anymore. You're not using any lending. So in that instance, you're not going for the highest return on investment, you're going for the highest cash flow.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And one of the main reasons that that Auckland property appears to have a higher return on investment in these numbers is that we always assume that Auckland properties go up at a higher rate than others. But you might say, I don't like that assumption, and you might jump in here and decide to change that. And if you did that, it would start to change the numbers as well. The other thing that's interesting is that the Wellington property, 27A Old Coach Road, which is that existing property I just showed you, that actually has the highest gross yield, higher than the Auckland property and higher than the Canterbury property that I've chucked in here. But actually on balance, it might actually have a lower return on investment. Now, why would that be the case, Andrew?
Because sometimes you might have lower costs on different types of properties. That's the main thing?
No, it's not.
I wasn't listening.
The main reason why this property might have a lower return on investment is you have to invest more money when you purchase an existing property because you require a 30% deposit as opposed to a 20% deposit for a new build here. And you can also sum up all of this negative cash flow and say, okay, how much do I actually need to invest to hold that property over 15 years?
The great thing here as well is you can add in existing properties in your portfolio. So it could be that you've owned a bunch of properties for a number of years and you're getting some positive income from those. Then you might have some properties that are negatively cash flowed and they could offset each other, and there are some tax considerations as well.
One last thing that I've just mentioned is it is very tempting when you jump in here, as you all will after this webinar or tomorrow, and putting in your own home. I wouldn't do that right now because if you put in your own home, you've got no rental income, but you could potentially have a large mortgage. And the risk is that you really scare the bejesus out of yourself because you're going to be like, wow, my property portfolio is really negatively geared. A large part of that might be your mortgage. I'm going to provide some updates around that so that you can still put your house in without it actually scaring the bejesus out of you.
Could you just take Old Coach Road and make it with no debt now? Let's assume that that's already a property that I own, and then show how it works from the portfolio tab, turning on a new property.
Okay, I think that's a really good idea. So let's come in here and we are going to say, actually, we have got 0 debt against that. And let's see how that would change the cash flow.
Okay.
And we actually now see, okay, our mortgage is 0. It is hugely positively geared. And if we went back and said, okay, what does my portfolio's cash flow look like? Now we start to see a bit of a different picture. Now you might say, okay, I'm looking at purchasing this one in cash and I'm going to borrow to buy this one in Auckland. So let's turn off that one in Christchurch. What does it look like? Now that portfolio is fully neutrally geared.
And a really important thing to consider here is this is all after tax figures. So if you've got a property that's making a profit at the moment, making positive cash flow and you're paying tax on that, you can obviously reduce your tax bill by having a property that's making a loss. So it could be that it doesn't cost you much, if anything, to add another property on. I see lots of investors like that. So again, looking at the portfolio as a whole is really important.
Now, I will tell you how to sign up in a second, but two things. I want to highlight this banner up here that says this is the first time we are getting the public in here. There may be things that look odd. If there is anything that looks odd, there is this giant button here that says feedback. This is where you can either send us an issue or send us an idea, because some of the best ideas come from you guys out in the community. So just have a look at that. That goes directly to me and I'll be checking that out. I saw one question just before we wrap up about how we actually register. I'll cover that in a little bit, but I've just got a little bit of housekeeping to go through before we show you exactly where to go ahead and sign up for that. Were you going to jump in? Sorry,
yeah,
Andrew?
just one thing that came up that I think probably is a really good question to answer, which is how secure is the information?
You asked me that just as I was having a drink. So we work with a local Christchurch company called Batch to build all of our apps. And we have had the one version of this up for probably the last 6 to 12 months. Actually, no, I think it's longer than that. I think it's a good 18 months. So we've already got a version of this live. And I mention that because that means that we're very aware of cyber risks, right? And we're constantly doing penetration tests to make sure, are we doing everything we can to protect that information? Now, that is an ongoing project that we're working on. And so our next step is we're currently working with a third-party cybersecurity agency to make sure that, are we missing anything? Are we absolutely sure we're doing everything in our power to make sure that that information is secure, because that's a very important consideration.
And one thing to remember, you can choose how much information you put in here. If you're really uncomfortable with putting information in here, what you could do is you could just put a made-up address in there and just use your numbers around your value of your property. And yeah, you're going to have to put your mortgage in there. But to be honest, if people want to find out if you had a mortgage or the value of the properties you own, most of that's public. Not your mortgage amount, but most of the rest of the things are public. So I wouldn't be too worried, and you can control some of that.
Cool. Now, just before I tell you how you can go ahead and sign up for that and answer some of those questions, a couple of key takeaways from this webinar. First of all, capital growth does tend to make more money than other ways, than the debt repayments, the instant equity and the cash flow. Though I do want to acknowledge that not everybody cares about capital growth. Some people say you're going to get it anyway, so don't worry too much about it. I disagree with that statement, but that is a view that some people have. The second thing is it is really important to compare the areas that make money, and specifically more than others. I think, and it is possible to find those areas that make more money. We've shown some examples of new builds at existing properties, but I do want to say that new builds are not the right fit for everyone, just like existing properties aren't either. And you do need a way to crunch the numbers if you're going to do it, whether you hang on to my old spreadsheet or decide to use my new version in Opus Plus. Now, just before we go in, some of you guys have never heard about us before here at Opus Partners, and a lot of people say, what do you do and how do I work with you guys? I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about that, because one way to figure out how to invest and make money through property is to use a DIY approach, and this is perfectly legitimate. You can use Area Analyser. That is free. We're giving it away to you. Opus Plus, that is free. We're giving that away to you. And you can go and invest on your own, and the benefit is you can do it yourself, but it is harder to figure out. You might have some questions on the way, and it is possible that you might make some more mistakes. The other option that you've got, and some of you guys already do this, is to use a financial advisor like Kathy, who's down in the chat, Neffy, who's down in the chat, or Andrew. That's where you get access to the same tools, but you also get access to the company that actually created these. Well, that means that you get to invest in a faster and more accurate way, but you do have to take the time to work with a financial advisor. And if you make that decision, if you decide that you do want to work with a financial advisor, here's what that looks like if you decide to work with Opus, although of course you don't have to. That's where we've actually got another tool within Opus Plus called Wealth Plan, which is where you get to build a plan, a property investment plan of what properties you're going to buy and when, so you can know that those properties and your investments are going to sort you out for retirement. On top of that, you might get to work with somebody like Kathy, and there she is there looking at new build properties with an investor just hanging around. I think that's in Horswell out in Canterbury and Christchurch as well. And so these are the two things we do at Opus, as well as building you these tools. We can support you by creating that property investment plan and finding new builds for you. And if you decide to work with a property investment company, it's really important to understand how they get paid. Because you as the investor might go and talk to a property investment company and they will have relationships with a range of developers. And if they could find the right developer and the right property that you want to purchase, they earn a fee from that developer. And that's how we here at Opus Partners keep the lights on without charging you a fee. Though, as I said before, you don't have to use Opus. One of my favorite things in these webinars is showing you that if you go and Google property investment companies, there are a range of companies that come up. Yep, sure, we're going to be up there, but so is Propeller, so is Positive Real Estate, so is Property Factory, and these are all people you could Google and legitimately go and use. And so that leads to a really good question, which is, well, why would I use you guys then? What actually makes you any different from the other people in the market that you could decide to go and use? And the first is that, as you've seen tonight, we use the most data to make really good investment decisions. On top of that, we've got properties you can't find on TradeMe. We try and prove that those properties are good prices and good deals by showing you every property pack we produce has a table that compares the property we're recommending with others that you could legitimately go and buy, trying to prove to you that it's a good investment decision rather than just telling you it is. And on top of that, we give you all of the support you need in one place. So Opus Partners finds you the properties, builds your plan. Opus Property Management, they can manage it. Opus Mortgages might get you the mortgage, and also Opus Accounting to do the tax returns. Now, I won't jibber jabber on too long, but I do want to say, if you want to take this further, I've got to offer you the chance to book a free $0 portfolio planning session. That's where an advisor like Ben here will create you that plan that we talked about. So the final poll I'm going to put across your screen is just whether you're keen to come in for that session. If you click the top one, you'll get a link to book a time tonight. And if you click the bottom one, no worries, you won't get the link and we won't say, hey, would you like to come in and send you emails? So producer Dave will put that one final time across your screen now, and you can just choose what's right for you. Now, some people say to me, Ed, I feel so bad clicking no. I feel so bad clicking no and saying I don't want to come see you. We are not offended. It is totally okay. Some of you guys have been clients for years, so you might not need to come in for a portfolio planning session, but I just want to give the opportunity to anybody who's new here tonight.
Just while everyone's clicking on that, do you want to give some information about what the future holds with Opus Plus?
Yeah, it's quite exciting actually. Just while everybody's filling that in, is the next step. I saw somebody in the chat just out of the corner of my eye asking about AI. We have got an AI tool that we plan to release in about the next 4 to 5 months. I think it's going to come early next year, which is going to take the spreadsheet that I shared with you all at the last webinar, which forecasts how many properties you can buy and was very, very popular. We're going to release that as an AI tool in Opus Plus. In 6 months' time, our goal is so that you could log in here and see your property management statements and see your inspection reports and see your tax returns and see all of your mortgage information. So tonight, this is just the first step. This isn't the final version of what we're releasing. It's just the first step to get it into your hands. And that's what's really, really exciting.
Why is my hand so big?
Okay, some people look at this and say, why is Andrew's head so big? The reason is because that is actually not Andrew's body, that is my body, with Andrew's head photoshopped on there.
Why?
Because I wanted a photo of you, but we didn't have a photo of you doing that pose. So that's the reason we did that. Now, how do you sign up for this? I'm going to ask Kathy and Neffy to put the link in the chat now. It is plus.opuspartners.co.nz. We'll also send you out this in an email tomorrow. Now, the other way you could do it is if you go to our website, opuspartners.co.nz, you will see next to the big orange button that says Choose Your Financial Advisor, there is a link that says Login. If you click the link that says Login, you will get to Opus Plus. Now, here's the thing. If you have ever had a wealth plan through us before, if you are a client, there is a very good chance that we have automatically created you an account. So you might be able to click get started, and then you'll just have to click forgot password and reset your password, and you'll be able to create one. But as a fail-safe, anybody can just go to register, go and try and sign up for an account. If you've already got one, if we've already created one for you, because you're a client or you've had a wealth plan before, it will just get you to reset your password anyway. So you can just go into register and actually create that account. You might find that your wealth plan is actually already in there, which is really exciting as well. Just before we get into questions, and I'm sure there'll be, I'm going to turn into tech support very, very soon. If you want to take this further, you might like to listen to the podcast. Episode 1832 went live today. Episode 1833 will go live tomorrow. On top of that, subscribe to our YouTube channel. I love our YouTube channel. We've got almost 20,000 subscribers on there. That's our current goal. We release 2 new videos on there every week, one on Monday, one on Wednesday. And on top of that, you might like to go and buy our book. It's called Wealth Plan. You can get it at wealthplanbook.com, and that's $39 with free shipping all around New Zealand. Right, let's come to questions and answers. What do you guys want to know?
Bradley's already made the comment that his wealth plan's already in Opus Plus. How cool is that? 60 questions. All right. Let's go. So someone said, someone has asked, can we have a beer together at the conference next month? What conference are we at?
Oh, we're speaking at the New Zealand, I think it's called the New Zealand Property Investors Conference.
Here in Christchurch.
It is here in Christchurch, put on by the amazing volunteers. I want to stress that, volunteers at the Canterbury Property Investors Association. If you are coming to that, I can't wait to meet you. I hope to meet you there. If you live in Christchurch and you want to come along, that is again put on by the Canterbury Property Investors Association. It's great to support the local volunteers who put this on and spend so much time of their own putting this on for everybody.
I think we're first cab off the rank at 9 a.m. on Sunday, right?
Oh yeah, do you know what we're talking about?
No. Do you know?
Yeah, I do know. Andrew and I are going to have a debate. This is what I've been told. It might change, but I've been told, or what they told me last year, is I'm going to argue that existing properties are the best and that's what to invest in. Andrew's going to argue that new builds are the best. So we're going to have a debate. I'm going to tell him that he's an idiot.
Fraser's asked the question, what would your best advice be to a 20-year-old who wants to start in property but doesn't have the funds? This is interesting timing. Today I met with someone who's pretty much the same shoes. He's 21, he's doing his final year of his degree, then he moves in with his folks. My advice to him was, when you get your salary next year, you need to save most of it. So we've kind of put together a plan where he saves 50% of his gross salary, gets himself into a habit of putting money aside, talk to his parents really nicely about maybe using some of their equity, but also don't use the strategy that we're talking about tonight. You're probably not going to be a buy and hold investor right away. You're probably going to need to build up your equity. So if you buy our wealth plan book, we talk about when you're starting out, when you're actually wanting to get yourself into the early stages of your property journey or your investing journey, and that's actually about creating more equity. So buying older properties, renovating them, and probably flipping them at that stage, or maybe holding on to them and then repeating the process. So there's heaps of information on our website about those strategies, those other strategies, because again, even if our strategy isn't the right one for you right now, it will be in the future. So we want you to be making good investment decisions now.
Yeah, fantastic. Reese asked the question, do you guys do in-person meetings? Because I'm old school. We do in Christchurch and also in Auckland, where our advisors are based. What else is piquing your interest, Andrew?
I saw this a couple of times. At the last webinar, we gave away a really cool tool that showed you how many properties you might be able to buy over the coming years. And there are a few people that said, I can't get it working. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, one of the big issues, and maybe I should just pull this up. This is, for anybody who wasn't at the last webinar, you guys might be like, what the hell is this guy talking about? He's got him bloody nerdy. What's going on here? So some people have said, is the spreadsheet broken? No, the spreadsheet is not broken, but
it's all right.
The way that some people use it is.
It's their fault now, is it?
But this is a really good point, because this is the exact reason why we're building Opus Plus, because some people are saying, Ed, I can't figure out your spreadsheets. I'm sure they're great, but I can't figure it out. So
if it helps, this is how he speaks to me as well.
No. So one of the things that some people have just forgotten or messed up a little bit is a lot of people have not got the terms or the interest rates right. So I saw one person sent me one of their spreadsheets and they're like, Ed, the spreadsheet's not working. But the reason was that they put the interest rate as 695%. So that would, like, just to show you what that would do, that would totally like mess up some of these functions. On top of that, somebody had, let's put that at 695, somebody didn't have a term on their mortgage. So if you delete the term out, then it is really going to mess it up, and then it's going to be like, oh, what the hell's going on? So one of the main pieces of advice I have is just check the mortgage term and check the interest rates, because that will really change everything. And that is one of the reasons why we're going to build that into Opus Plus as well, just to make sure that, hey, it's really easy to use, because I get that spreadsheets can be a bit fiddly.
Stephen's asked a question for you. Hi guys, I'm keen to invest on property, but I'm worried that we've basically had 50 years of house price exceeding wage growth. So can you talk more about that?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. There's a couple of reasons why we've seen house prices increase at a faster rate than incomes. One of them is the fact that we have seen declining interest rates. So over the last 40 years, we've seen interest rates decline from up to 26%. I remember I was on a flight once, and quite a few flight attendants listened to the podcast, and one guy was saying, yeah, when I bought my first house, it was 26%. Now, obviously, we're all complaining about 7%. Now, one of the reasons we're complaining about 7% is our mortgages are quite a lot larger as well. But one of the factors that has led to that acceleration in terms of house prices versus incomes is the fact that interest rates have structurally declined, which means we can afford to buy more. A couple of other things that are quite interesting is that as incomes grow, we are able to devote a higher share of our incomes to houses as well. And so that's one of the reasons why you also see an acceleration. But the other thing that's just really important to remember is that house prices to incomes is actually a very poor measure of whether house prices are currently sustainable or not. Because you've also got to look at, well, how does buying the house compare to renting a property? And what if I buy a house and I have my rates and I have my insurance, and how does that compare to if I rent? And in fact, if we look at the Reserve Bank's modelling, they're now saying that house prices where they currently are at are not affordable, but they are sustainable. And so I'd get you to listen to some of those other things. I actually released a really, really good video, if I can say this, on YouTube, where I talk about the future of house prices. And let me just see if I can pull that one up for you. My go-to is to go to YouTube, Future of House Prices, Opes, and see what comes up. So this one here, I'd probably get you to look at, which we released, I think it says there, in May 2024, because that has our full answer in there as well. What else is piquing your interest?
Someone's asked the question, can you explain the difference around deposits using equity, depending if it's a new or an existing investment property? So if you buy an existing rental property, you need to have a 30% deposit. If you buy a new build, you need to have a 20% deposit. So 30 if it's existing, 20 if it's new. Now that 20 or 30% can either come in cash or equity in another property, but it's got to be what we call usable equity. So you can't borrow all of the money against your existing home, but you've got to have either a 20 or a 30% usable equity to draw out from your home to put into the new investment. Now, on our website, any terms that we talk about that are unfamiliar to you, if you type them in the search, it will bring up a whole bunch of articles talking about usable equity, things like split banking. Someone asked about that before. So just type those things in there if you really want to get a bit more of a flavour after this webinar. There are a couple of questions which concern me. Someone had asked a question made the comment that they weren't able to get hold of us, which is very unusual. And someone actually just said that again in the Q&A as well. If you have any trouble getting hold of our team, can you email me directly and copy in Candice, who's my EA? All of our details are on the website. It might be, we've had a change in one of the positions recently from the calling team, so it might be that, but I want to be able to address that. So I've noted the names down to make sure they can chase it up.
Yeah, one other thing that might be just in there as well, because that obviously is concerning, is if you jump onto our website, click choose your financial advisor, choose somebody, or like fill out a form, we will call you, but we will also not harass you. So if we call 3 or more times and you don't pick up, we'll stop calling you because we don't want to harass you forever and say, hey, it's us 6 months later. Do you want that portfolio planning session you filled out a form on? I'm not sure about the exact details, but that's just a little bit of context as well. But email Andrew because he will come back to you.
Either way, I will be on it. Someone asked the question, there's been quite a few common themes around what does a 2-bed townhouse cost in Auckland? I can answer that pretty easily. Kind of entry level, about $650,000, maybe as low as kind of early 600,000s, all the way up to $1 million. I'm not saying $1 million is a good investment, but the question was how much does it cost? But certainly we've got entry level investments if you wanted to look at that in the early 600s. But then there were other follow-up questions like, should I buy a 2-bedroom house in Auckland? Is a 2-bedroom townhouse a good investment? That's when we get into personalised financial advice. I'm not going to tell you, yes, it's a good investment until we've actually had a portfolio planning session, because what's a good investment for you is not necessarily a good investment for Ed or myself. So a good investment is defined by what you're trying to achieve, and that's where you need a personalised financial advisor.
Now, Stanley's question's good, so get on to that, but I'll just answer a question from anonymous attendee. Now, this is such a good question. They've said some of the dates that we were talking about when it comes to Area Analyser are very close to what they're saying recessional crashes. So they're talking about the 2000s. They just had a dot-com crash. 2015 was the start of a recovery following the GFC is what they're saying. So are some of these property increases more reflective of stimulus coming into the market? Now, the first thing that I'd say is our Area Analyser, in terms of capital growth, it does start at quite an arbitrary date, January 2000. Why that? Because it was the start of the century, so we just chose that one, and that's where CoreLogic's data really starts to kick in from. And so CoreLogic gives me the data, that's the one I buy. But we are going to start to change that a little bit more. And instead of looking at a compounding growth over 23 or 24 years, which only includes 2 data points, I will update the Area Analyser to look at the average or the median increase per year. Now, for some of you guys, you might be like, what the hell is Ed talking about? And some of you will be like, yes, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just saying we're going to make it even more robust for you is the main thing. And then somebody, I think your question is also around to, oh, well, of course, 2015 was a good year to invest in Wellington because maybe there was some stimulus coming in. I think that's the point of the undervalued model. How do you figure out when is the time to invest as well? So that's one thing. Now, Stanley had that great question.
Yeah, how does a negatively geared property turn into a positively geared property with interest-only payments, which is a great question. So a few things happen. Right now, we are in a high interest rate environment, and interest rates will come down over the coming years. So yes, interest rates coming down is part of it, but also as time goes up, rents go up as well. And rent normally goes up at the rate that income goes up, so somewhere between 4 and 5%. So again, in the Opus Plus assumptions tab, you've got our general assumptions, and you can change those. You want to show that, don't you?
Yes, no, because Andrew told me that I should talk about it, and then I forgot to talk about it.
So assumptions are guesses. We're making educated guesses, but if you want to play around with these yourself, you just click in the change assumptions. Oh, you haven't shared your screen.
Yep.
There we go. Okay, and now we can look at what's the portfolio assumptions. So here we have our standard capital growth assumptions. Auckland, 6%, outside of Auckland, 5%. If you're buying a yield property or you have a high yielding property, that's a dual key or dual income property or a room by room rental or an apartment, then it subtracts 1.5% off that rate. Then you've got comparisons. Actually, there were quite a few questions around, can you compare property to shares or property to managed funds or term deposits? Yep, it does that, and I'll get Ed to show you that graph. And then it shows things like your tax rates, your interest rate setups. So
this is the really important one though, because by default at the moment, because interest rates are changing all of the time at the moment. So for the ones I've run tonight, I've said that, you know, by next year, interest rates might come down to 5.5%. Actually, that probably looks a bit pessimistic, actually.
Yeah, it probably is about high now.
5% by year 3, and then 4.5% on an ongoing basis. When you guys put in your properties, it will have harsher assumptions than these right now. I'll get those updated, but just be aware of that when you're adding your properties in. Andrew mentioned as well the comparisons with shares and term deposits. We actually haven't included these in first release. I'll get those released shortly, but you'll see it in here and you'll be able to see a bit of a breakdown on an ongoing basis. I actually think one of the coolest things is how it pulls through a Google Images Google Street View look at your property as well. So you can say, oh, that actually is what my property looks like.
The two things that I want to know with any investment is what do I have to put in and what am I going to get out? And right now, this version shows you exactly that. It's going to show you what you're going to have to put in as far as deposits, top-ups, and what you're going to get out in terms of capital growth over the next 15 years. So I think the first version is going to be really, really powerful once everyone learns to drive it. But there are some considerations like going in there and making sure the interest rates are realistic for where we think they are going in the next few years.
Dave's asked a really interesting question, which I'll jump into because it's written all in caps. So Dave is
You've got to yell it.
Can you explain? No, sorry, Dave. Can you explain the deposit comparison for new and old properties when using only equity? And so I think this is a great question because I think what he's really asking, and it's quite a technical one, but it's a really good one, which is if I'm using the no cash needed method. So I am borrowing all of the money to purchase an existing and a new build property. Why is it that in our calculators, we still say, well, the existing property requires a 30% deposit, which is a higher investment than the 20% deposit you'd need for a new build, but I'm borrowing the money for both, so does it really make a difference? And the answer is yes, because you are still borrowing that 30% deposit or that 20% deposit from somewhere else. You might be borrowing that money against your own home. You might be borrowing that money from an investment property or anywhere else. But the important point is you are still investing that money. In order to purchase that property, you've got to put in that deposit. You might be borrowing it, but you are still putting that money at risk. And so that is the reason that we are still included in there. It's a technical one. It's one that I've argued back back and forth with quite a bit. To build what you guys see in Opus Plus, we've had our spreadsheets reviewed by an awesome company called My Fiduciary. They're an investment company who checked it over from an investment lens. Then I chucked it through another one of these Excel eSport champions, which some of you guys mentioned in the chat, who we brought on and talked about in our last webinar to make sure that there weren't any mistakes in my spreadsheets when we put it through. And that's one of the ones that you can argue a little bit, but I do feel strongly if you're putting money at risk, you've got to include it in a return on investment, because otherwise property, not just new builds and not just existing properties, but all property can look like it gives almost a silly return on investment if you're only considering that you're putting in your cash flow investment. And I don't think that gives an accurate depiction of the money you're putting at risk, and I think it's just probably a bit misleading if I was to do it that way. So I just want to give some kind of honest numbers to you. Even though it's probably my best interest to make them look good.
Someone asked the question, how many properties can I load into my portfolio tab? So we've shown 3 tonight, but can you put unlimited properties? Into the actual, your portfolio tab.
Oh, so in terms of your portfolio, and just to make sure, when it comes to compare properties, we've chucked in 3, right? Oh, look at this, it's got a huge return on investment. Let's check out what's going on there. In terms of the properties you're looking into and the properties, like let's say that you can come in and say, I now own this property at some point. I'll find out where the button is because it's new for me too. My understanding is you can put unlimited properties in here. I haven't given any limit to the developers in terms of how many properties you can put in, which was actually another one of those limitations that
with the spreadsheet.
With the spreadsheet, I had somebody approach me in, I know where it was. It was in Palmerston North. I was down there speaking to the Manawatu Wanganui Property Investors Association, and somebody said, I want to put 12 properties in. And I said, the spreadsheet doesn't do that, and it's going to take me a long time to, update it to be able to do that, so I'm not going to do that. But the good thing with this is we don't have that limitation. So that's the really positive thing as well.
Someone asked the question, if I've got surplus cash, is it better to pay down debt or buy another property over the long term? So if you're wanting to build your wealth, paying down debt is basically the equivalent of savings, apart from you getting a good return on your money because mortgage rates are higher than savings rates. So it's great if you've got surplus cash to do that, but if you're wanting to build your wealth, generally speaking, it's better to go and buy another property and use that surplus cash to fund that.
Oh, we done with that answer?
Well, I don't know. Well, you're laughing. So
no, I was going to go on something else.
Which one's bird and which one's uni? Is that what
No, I got that. So Tony said, I'm having trouble registering for Opus Plus. So 2 things. If you want some help with any of the technical trouble, we've actually started a new email address. It's support at opuspartners.co.nz. And I've hired some people to sit there waiting for emails that people have, so that if people have trouble technically, they can help you out. The other thing that I'll just mention is sometimes, this is a funny story. Tony, I'm not ripping into you, but there's a funny story I want to tell you about one of our financial advisors who's on the phone with one of our team trying to help them get into Opus Plus, right? And so they were like, it's not accepting my password, it's not accepting my password. And they were on the blower for a good 7 minutes trying to figure this out with one of our team. Turns out that this financial advisor, let's call them Schmeary, was using the wrong password that they've been using for something else. So sometimes just be aware it can be user error, but we are here to help you out. And so you can always email support@opuspartners.co.nz.
And for the next wee while, we are going to have to ask for people's patience because there's going to be a lot of people that sign up over the next 24 hours, which is awesome. But if you are having issues, it probably is going to take a little bit longer to get that. Oh, it's Derry that did it.
Did you not get it?
Well, I thought Mary. I'm like, who the hell's Mary? Thank you for helping me out there, Greg.
And we've probably got time for 3 more questions before we wrap up.
Gillian Tan's asked a question, a few random questions. Why is there a current slowdown in the rental market? Is it mainly due to a drop in immigration numbers? So actually, we did a podcast on this recently. It is a little bit softer in particular markets at the moment from the rental side of things. I think a big part of that is because it's winter. We really feel it in the rental market. I've had a property management company now for 10 years, and every winter it gets really quiet and property managers get spooked. Every Christmas they get panicked about being able to fill houses, and they manage to do it. That's just what I found as a common trend. Having said that, there is more supply available at the moment and less demand, yes. So it will take longer, and if you're doing a budget for a property that you're buying today, I'd add on an extra couple of weeks vacancy just to be on the safe side.
Yeah, and just on that, we released this awesome thing about the rental market, which shows that a lot of investors are finding it hard to find good tenants at the moment. And what I've started doing is just releasing Trade Me data, and I update this every month as well, which shows that if you look at Trade Me data, in August, there were 6.6 million searches on Trade Me. That's the same. It's no change to the same time last year. But if we look at that, there were a total of 11,678 new rental listings. That is up 25% on the same time last year. So effectively, demand is roughly flat, but supply is up 25%. And so that's the real issue that we've got at the moment. That's the reason why the rental market is a little bit slow. What else? We've got time for 2 more questions.
Peter's asked, I'm just going to do a couple of quick things. Peter said, can Ed look into Liberty Trust? And I'm pretty sure I've seen you ask that before, Peter. I'll make sure he jots that down. If anyone's got any topics that they want us to cover on the podcast, best thing would be to actually email our journalist, Priscilla, who you'll find on our website, and make some suggestions via her. Ed gets a bunch of emails, so he'll, every now and then, every 2 months, he'll do a sudden purge, and I'll get 400 emails from him over the weekend. So better just to email Priscilla and say, hey, I'd really like the guys to do a podcast on this. If we think it's got enough juice, we'll absolutely do that. Someone asked another question around houses today. What do we think about houses?
Did somebody ask that in the chat?
Yeah, new fractional ownership option. We actually recorded a podcast today. It'll be out in the next week or so.
And I'll give you probably one more. Give us one more, Andrew. What's really piquing your interest? He'll have a little look. See, and I'll see what I've got up here as well in terms of some of the good ones. See above Alex, somebody mentioned a little tool up there.
Someone asked the question, bought a first home recently, owner occupied, but also interested in a rental property in the future. Is it better to pay down debt ASAP or just save up for the next house? You can do both. So often what I would suggest to someone in your position is set up part of your loan on what's called a revolving credit or an offset mortgage. Again, heaps of information on our website on that. And diligently pay down that part of your mortgage because you can redraw that for your deposit in the future. So you get the best of both worlds. You're saving money for your future deposit, but you're also reducing your interest in the meantime.
Okay, last one, because I really, really like this one, or 2 actually. Dennis has asked, does Opus manage properties in Christchurch? The answer is yes. If you go to our website, and actually I'll show you exactly where you can find it, Dennis, before I answer what might be the last question, unless Andrew jumps in, where Lee's asked a really good question. If you jump up to the top of our website and go to Opus Property Management, you can see it up here, and you'll be able to see our pricing as well when you click on landlords, $7.99 plus GST. Now the question came from, where's it gone, Andrew? I think I've gone to the wrong part. I was already on it. So Lee asked the question, how long will it take for prices to get back to their peak? That is a great question, and one we've got an answer for. We think it's going to take around 4 years in Auckland because property values fell about 19.7% below. And then what we've done, and I think this is in Auckland, if you bought a $1 million property at the peak of the market and it dropped in value to, let's call it 800K, in an optimistic scenario, it might take 2 years to get back to their value. That's if it was quite optimistic. In a pessimistic scenario, it might actually take you a wee bit longer. It might take you around 7 years, 7 to 8 years to get back to your peak value. But our central forecast, or our central projection is 4 years to get back to it. And the way we figure this out, I wonder if I've got it here. It explains it on here. But the way we figure this out is we are specifically looking at how fast have Auckland property prices gone up in the past, and what happens if it just went up by the average over the next 4 years. Okay, what happens if it went up above average? That's how we get to that optimistic scenario. Okay, what if property prices went up at a below average rate, like the lower quartile rate? Well, that's where we get our pessimistic scenario. So have a read of that, Lee. That's on our website. It was private property issue number 99 if you're searching for that on Google. Any others before we wrap up?
A few other people still asking how to get the app. So if you go to our website, you can click the login button at the top.
Yeah, I'll
show them again, Ed.
I'll show you exactly where it is. So if you go up, it is on every page of our website up here next to the big orange button. Oh, whoops, I clicked the choose your financial advisor. I get to sign up for Opus service. How wonderful. You click the login button here and that is going to take you through into Opus Plus. I'm already logged in, but if I wasn't logged in, this is exactly what you'd see here. You can either register or if you've already got an account, get started and you'll be able to register there. Right, we're going to run off to dinner. It's been so wonderful having you here today. We're going to be back again next month in October for another webinar, but in the meantime, we're so grateful that you've chosen to spend your Tuesday night. There are still over 780 people here keen to learn about property. At our peak, we had over 1,200 people online. It is just outrageous the support you guys give us, and we are so, so thankful that you tune up every single month. We'll see you guys later. Have a good night.